In 2015, The Martian gave us what I still think is the ultimate hard sci-fi survival story. One guy, a pile of potatoes, and a brutal fight against physics. There were no aliens, no galaxy-ending superweapons, and no chosen one prophecy. Just Mark Watney trying to survive on a planet that wanted him dead. Project Hail Mary deserves most of the praise it gets. It's funny, creative, full of clever science problems. But then I started thinking about it. The more I compared it to The Martian, the more I realized something wasn't clicking for me. I still loved watching it, but I never felt the same tension or emotional investment that I did with Watney stranded on Mars. It wasn't because the science got worse, or because Ryland Grace is a bad protagonist. It was because the story felt like it was trying to recreate what made The Martian work, instead of finding a completely different identity. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Plenty of authors revisit ideas they've explored before. But for me, Project Hail Mary ends up feeling like a bigger version of The Martian, instead of a better one. It takes the same problem-solving formula, raises the stakes as high as they can possibly go, adds a few new twists, and somehow ends up feeling a little smaller. That probably sounds backwards. So let me explain. When The Martian came out in 2015, it felt different from almost every big sci-fi story we've been getting. Hollywood had spent years convincing us that every space movie needed to involve saving Earth, fighting aliens, or stopping some disaster that threatened humanity. The bigger the danger, the bigger the movie. The Martian went in the opposite direction. Instead of trying to save the world, Mark Watney is just trying to survive until tomorrow. That's it. There's something almost refreshingly simple about that premise. One astronaut gets stranded on Mars, everyone assumes he's dead, and he has to figure out how to stay alive long enough for somebody to come back. On paper, it almost sounds too small to carry an entire novel. In reality, it's incredibly tense. Every chapter introduces another obstacle, but they're obstacles that feel believable. His food is running out, his equipment breaks, a dust storm damages his habitat. He has to calculate exactly how much water he can make, exactly how many potatoes he can grow, and exactly how much energy he has left. None of these problems are flashy, but every single one feels like it could kill him. That's what makes the story work. The danger doesn't come from giant explosions or impossible villains. It comes from watching one small mistake snowball into a life or death situation. You don't need to be an engineer to realize why losing your food supply is terrifying. You don't need a degree in botany to understand why a failed potato crop is a disaster. The science is detailed enough to feel authentic, but simple enough that the audience always understands what's at stake. That's an incredibly difficult balance to pull off, and I honestly think it's one of Andy Weir's biggest strengths as a writer. So naturally, when Project Hail Mary was announced, expectations were through the roof. And to be fair, Weir delivers another incredibly entertaining story. Ryland Grace is likable, the pacing is fantastic, and scientific puzzles are just as satisfying to watch as they unfold. There's a reason this movie has such a passionate fanbase. I don't think people are wrong for loving it, but once the excitement wears off, I think something starts to become obvious. Instead of asking how do I write another great survival story, it almost feels like the movie asks how do I make The Martian, but bigger. Instead of one astronaut trying to survive on Mars, it's one astronaut trying to save Earth. Instead of growing potatoes, he's solving an interstellar mystery. Instead of rescuing one person, he's trying to stop the extinction of humanity itself. On paper, those sound like improvements. Higher stakes, bigger scale, more important mission. The kind of sequel or spiritual successor that naturally feels more ambitious. But storytelling doesn't really work like that. One thing I've noticed is that our brains don't actually process gigantic numbers very well. We understand one person, we understand a family, we understand a group of friends. We can imagine losing those people because they're specific. The moment someone says 8 billion lives are in danger, something strange happens. The number becomes so huge that it almost stops feeling real. It's the same reason a movie can make you cry over one character you've known for 2 hours, but barely make you react when an entire city gets destroyed in the background. Bigger consequences don't automatically create bigger emotions. Sometimes they do the exact opposite. The Martian understands this perfectly. Mark Watney isn't trying to save humanity. He isn't trying to become a hero. He's trying to make it to the next morning. He's trying to grow enough food to survive another month. He's trying to fix equipment that keeps breaking. Every victory feels earned because every victory only buys him a little more time. And that's what makes the tension so effective. When an airlock explodes or his potato farm is destroyed, you don't just think, well, that's bad. You immediately start doing the math in your head. How much food did he just lose? Can he recover from this? Does this completely ruin his rescue plan? The story has taught you how fragile his situation is, so every setback lands with real weight. You're not thinking about abstract ideas like humanity or civilization. You're thinking about one exhausted astronaut who's once again watching months of hard work disappear in an instant. That personal connection is where the tension comes from. Project Hail Mary uses almost the exact same problem-solving structure, but attaches it to a threat so massive that it starts to become difficult to emotionally connect with. The sun is dying. Alien microorganisms are consuming stars. Humanity has only a few decades left before civilization collapses. Those are undeniably higher stakes. No one's arguing that, but they're also much harder to feel. Instead of constantly worrying about whether Grace will survive the next challenge, I often found myself sitting back and watching another clever science puzzle unfold. They're fun puzzles, really fun, but they don't carry quite the same feeling of desperation, because the scale is so enormous that it almost becomes abstract. Ironically, by trying to make the stakes bigger, the story ends up making them feel smaller. It's still exciting, it's still clever, it's still one of the most entertaining hard sci-fi movies I've seen in years. I think it's the natural consequence of taking a story that worked because it was intimate and trying to scale it up into something that has to carry the weight of an entire civilization. The Martian never had to convince me that survival mattered. It never had to remind me that failure would be catastrophic. It trusted that one man's life was enough. Project Hail Mary keeps reminding me that humanity is on the line, yet somehow I felt less anxious reading it than I did watching Mark Watney try to grow potatoes on Mars. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons The Martian still sticks with me years later. It understood that sometimes making a story feel bigger isn't about raising the stakes. Sometimes it's about making us care more about the person facing them. There's another reason The Martian sticks with me more, and it's something I didn't even notice until I compared the two movies side by side. It's not just about the stakes or the characters, it's about the kind of problems each story asks its protagonist to solve. In The Martian, almost every obstacle is rooted in something we already understand. Watney isn't discovering new laws of physics or stumbling across some incredible cosmic mystery. He's dealing with food shortages, broken equipment, failing batteries, air pressure, chemistry, and simple engineering. The challenge isn't figuring out how the universe works. The challenge is figuring out how to use the tools he already has in smarter ways. Even if you don't understand every scientific detail, you can follow the logic. When something goes wrong, it feels like you're solving the problem alongside him, because the rules are clear from the start. The movie gives you the pieces and lets you watch Watney rearrange them into a solution. That's a huge part of why the story is so addictive. You can actually play along. When his crops fail, you immediately start wondering how he'll replace the food. When a vehicle breaks down, you start thinking about spare parts, energy, and distance. The audience is constantly invited into the problem-solving process. You may not arrive at the same answer Watney does, but you feel like you could have if you fought hard enough. Project Hail Mary takes a different approach. The science is still clever, and Andy Weir clearly put an incredible amount of thought into making it feel believable, but so much of the story revolves around astrophage and discovering what it can do next. Every few chapters there's another revelation, another hidden property, another piece of information that changes everything. Those moments are exciting. Some of them are genuinely brilliant, but they're exciting for a different reason. Instead of watching someone squeeze every last bit of potential out of limited resources, you're often waiting to see what new discovery comes next. With Project Hail Mary, I spent more time waiting for the next reveal because there was no way to predict information the story hadn't shown me yet. I wasn't trying to outthink the movies as often. I was waiting for the movie to reveal another piece of the puzzle. It's still fun, it's just different kind of engagement. And I think that's another reason The Martian feels more grounded. Its biggest twists don't come from uncovering secret truths about the universe. They come from taking ordinary science and pushing it to its absolute limit. Watching someone survive by combining chemistry, botany, and engineering in increasingly desperate ways somehow feels more impressive to me than watching someone solve problems with discoveries that couldn't have been predicted in advance. Both books celebrate science, but they celebrate different parts of it. The Martian celebrates invention, Project Hail Mary celebrates discovery. One asks, what can a human being build with the knowledge we already have? The other asks, what incredible thing might still be out there waiting to be found? Those are both great questions. I just think the first one makes for the more compelling survival story. And that becomes even more obvious when we get to the biggest difference between the two movies: isolation. Because once Project Hail Mary introduces Rocky, it stops being a story about one person alone against the void and becomes something completely different. If the inflated stakes make Project Hail Mary feel less tense, then Rocky completely changes what kind of story it is. And before anyone gets the wrong idea, this isn't me saying Rocky is a bad character. He's fantastic, he's funny, memorable, surprisingly emotional, and honestly, he's probably the biggest reason people remember the movie so fondly. If someone told me Rocky was their favorite character, I'd completely understand. But I also think he's the moment where Project Hail Mary stops trying to be the Martian and quietly becomes something else. What made the Martian so compelling wasn't just that Mark Watney was stranded on Mars, it was that he was alone. Really alone. Not the rest of the crew is somewhere else on the ship alone, not I'll call mission control in a few minutes alone, completely alone. For most of the story there's no one to bounce ideas off, no one to reassure him when something goes wrong, no one to tell him he's going to make it. Every success and every mistake belongs entirely to him. Even when NASA discovers he's alive, that feeling doesn't disappear. Communication is painfully slow. Help is millions of miles away. Watney still has to solve every problem himself, because nobody else physically can. That isolation becomes another obstacle he has to survive. His jokes suddenly make a lot more sense when you look at them that way. People often talk about how funny the Martian is, but I don't think the humor is there just to make the reader laugh. It's there because Watney needs it. His video logs feel like someone desperately trying to stay sane. He talks to the camera because it's the closest thing he has to another human being. Every sarcastic comment and dumb joke feels like it's a coping mechanism against the crushing silence around him. The comedy doesn't take away from the tension, it actually reinforces it. Because every time he makes a joke, you're reminded that there's nobody there to hear it. That's a surprisingly lonely feeling. Then Project Hail Mary introduces Rocky, and almost overnight the emotional core of the story changes. Instead of watching one person slowly lose their mind in complete isolation, you're suddenly watching two incredibly intelligent characters solve problems together. They experiment together, they argue, they teach each other, they celebrate victories together, they even become genuine friends. It's charming. Honestly, it's one of the most enjoyable friendships I've read in modern science fiction, but it's also a completely different experience. The loneliness disappears, the silence disappears. The constant feeling that one mistake could mentally break the protagonist almost completely fades away, because Grace finally has someone who understands exactly what he's going through. Whenever something goes wrong, he isn't carrying the weight by himself anymore. He has Rocky. That changes everything. Instead of feeling like a survival story where one man is fighting the impossible, it starts feeling like two engineers working through a series of increasingly complicated science projects together. Those projects are fun, some of them are incredibly clever, but they don't create the same kind of pressure. That's something uniquely terrifying about having absolutely nobody to rely on. Once that disappears, so does a huge part of what made The Martian so emotionally gripping. And I think that's why I never felt the same sense of desperation watching Project Hail Mary. I was entertained, I was impressed, I was rooting for both of them. But I was rarely anxious, because as long as Grace and Rocky had each other, there was always a feeling that they'd figure something out together. The story shifts from survival to collaboration. Again, that's not a flaw. It's just a different kind of story. The problem is that Project Hail Mary still uses too much of the Martian's DNA that it's impossible for me not to compare the two. And when I do, I keep coming back to the same conclusion. The Martian didn't need another character to carry the emotional weight. It trusted that one ordinary guy, armed with nothing but science and a stubborn refusal to quit, was enough. And somehow, it was.